For years, the document remained sealed beneath layers of royal protocol, known only to a handful of archivists sworn to silence. But when the record was finally opened, one name changed the mood inside the palace instantly. Princess Charlotte had not merely been remembered by Queen Elizabeth. She had been personally selected for a future royal duty, one carrying responsibility, symbolism, and a private promise the monarchy could no longer ignore. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William read the name once, then again. His fingers tightened around the page before he lowered it onto the desk, as though the paper had become heavier. The royal record, a formal document preserving decisions meant to guide the monarchy, confirmed that Charlotte had been chosen as the future guardian and ceremonial representative of a private remembrance duty. That duty would require her, when older, to protect Elizabeth's personal legacy at major national anniversaries. This mattered because it gave the young princess a purpose separate from George, while placing a public burden upon her before she could understand its cost. Catherine moved closer and covered the final paragraph with her hand. Pride came, but fear followed. Was their daughter being honored, she asked, or quietly pulled into obligation before she was ready? The princess knew how quickly royal praise could become royal expectation. William did not answer. He understood the distinction written into the directive. Charlotte had not been named as a substitute for her brother or a rival to the future heir. Elizabeth had created a separate responsibility around the child's discipline, composure, and instinct for connecting family memory with national service. The silence deepened when an archivist's documented briefing revealed that the signed directive had been placed among private succession records, ceremonial instructions, and sealed family memoranda reviewed after the monarch's death. A memorandum, in plain terms, is a written note preserving an official intention. This one carried a release condition. The instruction could be discussed only when Charlotte reached the stage at which her future public duties might be prepared. Then William noticed the reference to a second page. The missing sheet had been sealed separately. Its contents, according to the archival account, explained why Elizabeth had chosen Charlotte over older and more experienced royals. Yet before the prince could request it, a telephone message confirmed that another senior family member had already sought access. The honor was no longer personal. It had become contested ground, but before Charlotte could understand why her great-grandmother had chosen her, the adults around her had to confront what the decision threatened to change. The honor belonged to Charlotte, but the weight of it immediately fell upon everyone who loved her. William saw a promise from the late queen. Catherine saw a childhood that could become measured by obligation. Charles saw continuity. And the young princess, still unaware of the conversations unfolding behind closed doors, stood at the center of a decision made before she could ever consent to carry it. William felt the conflict before he spoke aloud. His daughter had been raised close to the line of succession, yet without the constitutional burden carried by George, whose future was already shaped by the crown. Charlotte's place was different. She was expected to support, steady, and serve, but not to live beneath the same relentless pressure. Elizabeth had understood that difference. The late monarch had watched the siblings carefully and recognized that the girl's calm nature strengthened her brother rather than challenged him. Catherine listened as the prince admitted what frightened him most. Refusing the instruction could seem like a rejection of Elizabeth's final judgment, but accepting it too quickly could turn their daughter into a royal symbol before she had discovered who she wanted to become. The princess answered with unusual firmness. Charlotte, she warned, was not a solution to be deployed whenever the institution needed comfort, unity, or reassurance. The monarchy had taken enough from children in the name of duty. After dinner, the parents sat opposite their daughter with no advisors present. William explained slowly that her great-grandmother had left her a special responsibility for the future. Charlotte did not interrupt. She clasped her hands tightly beneath the table and listened until he finished. Then she asked the question neither parent expected. Does George already know? The words exposed the fear beneath her silence. She was not thinking about status, ceremony, or praise. She was thinking about her brother. Catherine understood at once that the honor had already entered the most private part of the family. William assured her that the duty would never place her above George, yet the pause before his answer betrayed uncertainty. He could control what happened inside that room. He could not control how courtiers, headlines, or the wider palace might present the appointment once it became public. Then George entered and noticed the sealed folder resting near his father's hand. His eyes moved from William to Catherine, then finally to Charlotte. No one spoke. The young princess now faced a choice far heavier than the document itself. Tell her brother the truth in her own words, or allow the adults to shape the meaning before he could hear it from her. That quiet family conversation carried the first warning. Elizabeth's choice might strengthen the future monarchy, but it could also alter the bonds holding its youngest heirs together. Elizabeth's decision had not emerged from sentiment alone. It began with a moment so small that most people in the room barely noticed it. Yet the Queen noticed. She remembered who remained calm, who protected another child from embarrassment, and who understood instinctively that service was not always about standing in front. Years later, that single incident became the foundation of Charlotte's extraordinary future duty. Elizabeth had spent years worrying that royal service was becoming too closely tied to inheritance, titles, and distance from ordinary emotion. Rank could decide who walked first, who spoke last, and who stood nearest the sovereign, but it could not reveal character. The monarch believed every younger member of the family needed a purpose shaped by temperament rather than position. Charlotte, she had begun to suspect, possessed something no formal order could create: the instinct to support without demanding attention. The decisive moment came during a private Windsor remembrance ceremony. A remembrance ceremony is a formal act of honor for those who served, suffered, or died in national history. George had been asked to read a short tribute, but halfway through, he lost his place. Silence tightened around him. Before panic could take hold, Charlotte stepped closer, pointed quietly to the correct line, and moved back without drawing a single eye toward herself. Her brother continued. The moment passed, but Elizabeth had seen everything. Later, the Queen called William aside and described what she had witnessed in a documented family account. Charlotte had protected George without seeking praise, she said, and that was the beginning of real duty. William smiled and treated the remark as a great-grandmother's affection. Catherine did not. She noticed Elizabeth asking careful questions afterward about the girl's memory, confidence, and response to pressure. The princess understood that the monarch was not merely admiring a child, she was assessing one. That evening, Elizabeth summoned her private secretary, the senior official responsible for recording and carrying out the sovereign's personal instructions. In a dictated account, she ordered the first version of the future remembrance duty. The role, she insisted, must belong to someone capable of serving the crown without needing to command it. The sealed record later revealed something even more serious. Elizabeth revised the directive twice, each time strengthening Charlotte's authority and preventing a future court from quietly transferring the responsibility elsewhere. The final change followed a tense private conversation with Charles. Whatever passed between mother and son had forced the monarch to protect her choice with unusual care. The honor was no longer merely a touching legacy from a great-grandmother. It was the outcome of an old disagreement that Charles had never expected to face again. The confrontation did not begin with shouting. It began with Charles closing the study door and asking William why the document had reached the children before the palace had agreed on its meaning. The prince did not apologize. For the first time, Elizabeth's instruction placed father and son on opposite sides of Charlotte's future, and neither man was prepared to surrender control of what happened next. Charles moved toward the desk and placed the sealed record between them. His voice remained controlled, but the anger beneath it was unmistakable. Any future duty connected to national remembrance, he argued, had to be managed through the sovereign's office, the part of the royal household that carries out the reigning monarch's official decisions. The timing, language, and public meaning could not be decided inside one family room. If the palace lost control of the announcement, speculation could turn Charlotte's honor into a challenge to George. William refused to accept that argument. He told his father that the instruction concerned his daughter before it concerned the institution. Charlotte's fear, George's reaction, and Catherine's concern could not be reduced to a communications problem. The future king leaned forward. pushed the folder back across the desk, and said the young princess would not become a palace instrument, simply because Elizabeth had recognized her strength. Charles did not answer immediately. He removed his glasses, pressed his fingers against his eyes, and allowed the silence to expose what pride had concealed. Then the monarch admitted that his mother had confronted him years earlier. According to a recorded private conversation preserved in the archival account, Elizabeth told him he misunderstood the difference between preparing a child for duty and possessing that child's future. William felt the meaning land with brutal force. His father had known about the concern long before the record was opened. The king had not merely discovered Charlotte's appointment with everyone else, he had once stood against the thinking behind it. That silence now felt less like caution and more like concealment. Charles finally revealed the fear beneath his resistance. He had never opposed Charlotte herself. He feared that the role could create another emotional center within the monarchy, attracting affection and loyalty beyond the direct heir. Elizabeth had seen harmony. He had seen the possibility of division. Before William reached the door, Charles delivered one final warning. The second sealed page would decide whether the duty remained exactly as the late queen ordered or was reshaped under the present reign. Everything now depended on the missing page, because hidden within Elizabeth's final explanation was the power to settle the argument or deepen the fracture beyond repair. The second page was not simply a letter of affection. It was a safeguard. Elizabeth had anticipated that future courtiers might dilute the role, delay it, or quietly transfer its ceremonial meaning elsewhere, so she built protection into the record itself. Yet the person holding the greatest authority over its release was not Charlotte, William, or even Charles. It was the keeper of the late queen's private instructions. Charles understood the insult before anyone explained it. The record had been placed under a special archival protocol, meaning a protected process governing how sensitive royal papers could be opened, verified, and released. The Crown Archivist, the official responsible for preserving the monarchy's historic documents, could not disclose the page alone. Two named family witnesses also had to approve it. Elizabeth had designed the system so that no future sovereign could erase, weaken, or reinterpret the private purpose attached to Charlotte's remembrance duty. The king felt the restriction like a final correction from his mother. Even after her death, she had anticipated resistance from the court surrounding him. Anne felt the strain differently. She had been named as one of the witnesses, placing her between loyalty to her brother and obedience to the exact language Elizabeth had preserved. The princess knew that supporting the safeguard might wound Charles, yet ignoring it would betray the monarch whose instructions she had promised to protect. Charles confronted her alone. He asked whether their mother had trusted him at all. Anne did not answer quickly. She allowed the silence to carry the pain neither sibling could avoid, then said Elizabeth had trusted him to reign, but had not always trusted the palace around him. The distinction struck hard. The king was not being rejected as a son. His household was being restrained as an institution. When the archivist finally opened the page in a documented family meeting, the first revelation changed the argument completely. Charlotte could not be forced to accept the role. She would retain the personal freedom to decide when she was mature enough, turning Elizabeth's instruction from an order into an invitation. The second revelation tightened the pressure further. William and Anne were named as joint guardians of the preparation process, limiting Charles's authority over how the young princess would be trained. Then Camilla learned of the arrangement through a formal palace briefing. The queen consort immediately questioned whether Elizabeth had deliberately placed the king's household outside Charlotte's future. With the safeguards exposed, the honor began producing consequences far beyond Charlotte, forcing every senior royal to decide whether Elizabeth's final wishes were a legacy to protect or a boundary to resist. The palace moved quickly once the second page was authenticated. Calendars changed. Advisors were reassigned. A private program of historical instruction was drafted under Charlotte's name. What had begun as a sealed family message now altered the machinery of the monarchy. Yet inside the Wales household, the young princess did not feel powerful. She felt watched, and for the first time, the honor began to resemble a loss. Anne accepted responsibility for occasional mentoring sessions, while William drew a firm line around his daughter's childhood. The preparation plan would teach Charlotte about national remembrance ceremonies, royal archives, and the symbolic weight of preserving Elizabeth's legacy. A royal archive is the protected collection of documents that records the monarchy's decisions and history. The prince agreed that knowledge mattered, but he refused to allow extra public appearances, formal rehearsals, or stage duties to enter her life before she was ready. Catherine noticed the change first. A courtier addressed Charlotte with a new seriousness and began explaining expectations that had never been meant for her ears so soon. The girl became quieter afterward. Later, she told her mother that she did not want George to believe she was being trained to replace him during moments that should belong to the future king. The princess reassured her, but the fear remained. Success had arrived disguised as pressure, and honor had begun to feel dangerously close to separation. The tension broke during breakfast. An aide placed a briefing folder beside Charlotte's seat and quietly explained that it contained her first preparatory notes. She looked at it, pushed it away untouched, and asked whether she could finish one ordinary school week before becoming part of history. William heard the exhaustion beneath the question. He canceled the first formal briefing immediately, angering officials who believed delay could be seen as disrespect toward Elizabeth's command. George said nothing while the adults argued. After Charlotte left, he reached for the abandoned folder and found a handwritten line copied from the late Queen's record. Elizabeth had described his sister as the one who will help the heir remember what the crown is for. The sentence changed everything. She had not been chosen to stand above him. She had been chosen to keep him grounded when duty became too heavy. George closed the folder and went to find her alone. The institution had turned Charlotte's honor into pressure, but the person capable of freeing her from its heaviest burden was the brother she feared it might push away. No monarch, advisor, or archivist could resolve what had formed between the children. Only George could do that. He found Charlotte away from the adults, carrying the copied sentence Elizabeth had written about them both. There was no ceremony in the conversation that followed. No titles, no rehearsed language. Just a brother and sister confronting the fear that royal duty might one day force them apart. George understood what the adults had failed to explain clearly. Charlotte's future responsibility had not been created to challenge his position. It existed to protect the emotional meaning of the monarchy, the human purpose hidden beneath ceremony, rank, and duty. As the heir, he would one day carry constitutional responsibility, meaning the formal obligations attached to the crown. His sister had been given a different task, one rooted in remembrance, continuity, and the quiet strength to remind him why service mattered. Charlotte finally admitted what had frightened her. She feared George would believe the family trusted her more, especially after courtiers began speaking to her, as though she had suddenly become someone else. The honor had changed the way adults looked at her, before it had changed anything inside her. She worried that every lesson, folder, and whispered conversation would place distance between them. George answered with equal honesty. When he first saw the sealed folder, he had felt excluded. He wondered whether a secret future was being built around Charlotte, while he was expected simply to accept it. But Elizabeth's handwritten sentence changed his understanding. The appointment was not only a message about his sister, it was also a warning to him. Power without memory could become empty, and duty without compassion could harden into control. With no aides nearby, George folded the copied page and placed it in Charlotte's hands. He promised that when the responsibility finally became hers, he would stand beside her, rather than ahead of her. Charlotte held the paper for a moment, then made her own decision. She would accept the duty only under the freedom clause Elizabeth had protected, the condition allowing her to choose when mature enough, rather than obey under pressure. Together, the siblings went to William and Catherine. They explained their decision in their own words, proving that the honor had strengthened the bond Charles feared it might divide. Yet their unity created one final problem for the palace. How could a private promise be announced without turning Charlotte into a public symbol before she was ready? The private crisis had been settled by two children with greater clarity than the adults around them, but the moment still had to survive the judgment of the outside world. When the announcement finally came, it did not describe Charlotte as a rival heir or a child elevated above her siblings. It presented her as the future custodian of a remembrance duty personally shaped by Queen Elizabeth. Yet the careful language could not contain the emotional force of the revelation. Across Britain, the story became less about rank and more about why the late monarch had seen something exceptional in her great-granddaughter. Charles felt the danger immediately. The formal palace statement confirmed that Charlotte had been chosen to undertake the commemorative role only when she reached adulthood and freely agreed to accept it. A commemorative role is a public responsibility created to preserve memory through national ceremonies and anniversaries. The wording also made clear that her duty would support the sovereign and the heir, not alter the line of succession or create a rival office beside George. William insisted that one sentence remain untouched: Charlotte's choice must be protected. The prince knew the public might celebrate the honor while forgetting the cost of carrying it. Charles feared the announcement would expose the old disagreement with Elizabeth, yet his son refused to hide the Freedom Clause merely to protect the palace from embarrassment. Their conflict had softened, but it had not disappeared. Catherine watched Charlotte read the final statement before its release. The princess asked one last time whether she felt comfortable having her name connected to a lifelong expectation. Charlotte paused, then said she was comfortable only because the promise still belonged to her future self. Her answer gave her mother pride, but it also revealed how carefully the child had learned to defend her own boundaries. For Charlotte, celebration arrived, but innocence had become harder to protect. Outside Buckingham Palace, the reaction became impossible to contain. A crowd gathered beneath a newspaper display carrying the front-page headline, "Elizabeth's Promise to Charlotte," beside an image of the young princess standing with George at a remembrance service. A national broadcaster called the appointment a duty of memory rather than power, and the phrase spread quickly because it captured what the palace had struggled to explain. Then the monarchy released Elizabeth's handwritten sentence: Charlotte would help the heir remember what the crown was for. The words transformed the announcement from a story of rank into one of sibling unity. Public approval settled the external argument, but one private reckoning remained. Charles prepared to meet Charlotte himself and finally say what pride, fear, and history had kept buried. Britain had accepted Elizabeth's choice, but the story could not truly close until the king faced the young princess, whose future had forced him to confront his mother's final judgment. The final moment did not take place before cameras or beneath the weight of ceremony. It unfolded quietly, with Charlotte standing before Charles as he held the original record bearing Elizabeth's signature. The dispute was over. The safeguards had been honored. The family had survived the tension. What remained was for the king to recognize that his granddaughter's greatest qualification was not obedience, but the freedom to choose service for herself. Charles invited Charlotte, William, Catherine, George, and Anne into a private family meeting where the authenticated directive would enter the permanent royal record. An authenticated directive is an officially verified instruction, preserved so its meaning cannot later be denied or altered. The moment mattered because it ended the struggle over control and protected the child at its center. Anne opened the documented account and confirmed that every condition written by Elizabeth remained intact. Charlotte could accept, delay, or decline the responsibility without punishment, embarrassment, or public shame. The princess repeated the clause slowly, ensuring no courtier could later turn freedom into pressure. Her loyalty to the late monarch now became protection for the next generation. Charles faced his granddaughter and admitted what he had resisted saying. He feared the appointment would divide the family, weaken George's position, and create another center of loyalty. Charlotte's restraint proved him wrong. Elizabeth had understood that the girl could carry honor without chasing power. William listened as the confession softened the anger left from their confrontation. The prince recognized that his father's resistance had grown partly from fear of repeating the damage caused when royal children were prepared for duty but denied control over their lives. The king handed Charlotte a copy of the signed page and closed the archival box himself. She accepted the document, then told him she would decide when she was older. Charles nodded. "That is exactly what your great-grandmother intended," he replied. George moved beside his sister. The family agreed that the role would never rank one child above another. It would connect the heir, the household, and national memory. The palace later adopted Elizabeth's model: character before ceremony, consent before obligation, and service before status. Charlotte's honor was not a title, it was trust. The late queen had recognized courage without ambition, and the family understood that monarchy survives not only through inheritance, but through those who freely choose to serve beside it. Elizabeth's record was closed, the family's conflict was settled, and Charlotte's future remained where the late queen had deliberately placed it, in her own hands. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.